Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. It's Friday. There's not going to be an update video for tomorrow. I told you on Friday I would answer your questions. I'm not even editing this video, so if it sucks, sorry. Anyway, you guys asked a lot of questions. I'm going to try to answer them. And I'm going to limit this video to 20 minutes because I got to get stuff done bad. Tomorrow we're taking the truck to the chassis shop. I still need to load it. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started. A couple of things. Each time I switch to a different question, I'll hold up this green thing so you can see if it's not a question you want to hear answered. Just fast forward till you get to the next time I hold up the green card. These are questions from the exact video that I asked. So we'll get started. I don't have a way to put the question at the bottom. I'm sure there's a way. I don't have time is what I'm trying to say. And someday I'll figure that out. But anyway, here we go. Let's get going. And I'm just doing this from most recent to last, sorry. Okay. It says on a 2-barrel carburetor only rule for wingless sprints, what do you do different for porting wise, heads and intake? On that stuff, really, I don't really do a whole lot of 2-barrel stuff because most of the 2-barrel stuff that's around here says on Circle Track says no porting. But if I was to port, I would say I try to do stuff for hides and I'm just focusing on velocities as far as the port itself. Usually on those classes, the heads don't flow enough. So any flow you really get, it's like a win. That's how I look at that stuff. But again, I'm on a different scenario. Ours is like spec heads that flow maybe 220. And the engine's asking for way more CFM than that. It's probably not the answer you're looking for, but that's what you got. I should probably have backed up and said, look, I'm a dumbass, so there's probably going to be a bunch of this stuff that you don't agree with, and I'm no Superman. I do make mistakes, and these are just my opinions. Next question. This one actually came from someone had emailed me this one, and so it's not on this one. He said, how come you don't talk more about velocities as far as the port velocity, average velocities, velocity through the pinch and throat? I think I kind of know where that's coming from, and let me tell you. Here's part of it. I think, not a lot of people, but I think several head porters, and I'm not mentioning anybody in specific, and I think it's done through any industry really. What a lot of them try to do is they will try to overwhelm you with a lot of technical jargon, and it makes themselves sound really, really smart. And I'm not really singling out anybody that may feel like I am. But that stuff really it's important. It totally is, and I don't want to take anything away from it. But most of these videos are like 20 minutes long, and you have you only have a limited amount of time to do it. But to get to it, and I'll answer this really quickly. There are 3 things really that go together. 3. You've got CFM, size, and velocity. Those 3 together come together to make them all work the same. For instance, if I know a certain shape or certain size, and I make it flow a certain amount of air, I can calculate the velocity. Any one of those can be interchanged. The reason why I don't so much speak on the velocity part, and I do. I've put up velocity charts on many of this stuff. You just may not have seen it on the video you were wanting to see. But the reason why I don't put up so much velocity is because I'm telling you the size. So if I know how much it flows and I know the size, I know what the velocity is. And you can, and plus when I'm in the porting room and I'm grinding, I'm not gonna keep popping off on the bench and put it on here to measure the velocities when I know what the size should be and I know what air it should move for the velocity to be what it is. So hopefully that kind of explains it. You're like, well, what about localized velocities? I actually talk about that quite a bit in the several of the videos, especially that one about the raised runner head. How I told you if you look at the velocities, I mapped it out. I try to keep them as even as possible. So I know that's kind of a weird way of answering it. Yes, I do care about it, but no, it would make the videos too long. But if you know 2 of the 3 things, you know the other. So if you know CFM, size, you can know velocity. If you know velocity and CFM, you can calculate size. They all kind of go together. Anyway, next question. This one says, I have some real old 220 AFR CNC ported heads. Is there anything to be gained by grinding on them? Yes, actually. The older 220s, if I remember right, and it's been a while, I believe those actually had a different valve spacing than standard. I believe they were like 40-60. You can port those if no one's messed with them. Everyone I've seen, someone has gone and ruined them. But you can port them and make them better. They can actually be a really, really good head. So if you've got an older set of AFR, it's not the end of the world. For instance, right now I'm working on an older set of AFR 195s. That will end up being a future video, and that one will probably turn out better than the new stuff. So anyway, there you go. Next one, it says AFR 220 versus Brodix Dragon Slayer. Out of the box, AFR 220 will beat it. Not even a question. Strictly flow-wise, if you look at it, the AFR moves about 300 CFM. The Brodix Dragon Slayer on my bench moves about 290. And you're like, well, there you go with CFM again. If you look at the cross-sectional area, there's more cross-section with the Dragon Slayer, and there's less with the AFR 220 as far as the minimum cross-section. However, if you look at the entire flow curve from all lift points, the AFR is better. And this is on intake and exhaust. Now that's out of the box. If I port them, the Dragon Slayer is actually better. And the reason why is on an AFR 220, it's really hard to get the minimum cross-sectional area bigger than 2.5 because there's only 30 thousandths of material in the pushrod slot area. So you really can't touch that. Versus the Brodix Dragon Slayer, easily with the 1206 gasket, I can get about 2.63 and 2.71 if I did a bastard port. And what I mean is, because it's got a larger cross-sectional area, it will allow an engine to RPM higher when porting, so they can make more power. And I know you're like, well, wait a minute, what about when you go back to back? Well, if you look at how efficient it is, how it's using that area in stock form versus what the AFR does, it's got a bigger pinch. Yes, the Brodix Dragon Slayer does, but it doesn't have as much air going through it, so the velocity is slower, and which obviously, but that was what I'm trying to say. It's just not as efficient with the area, so it's bigger, but it could move more air. If it moved more air through that same spot, it would make more power. It doesn't out of the box. Find out what you want to hear, but there you go. All right, next one. Thank you for this is from Built in Your Garage. I'm going to read the names now too. Thank you for your videos. They're very informative. I think it'd be very informative to do multiple valve jobs with same spring rates and see how much PSI each one holds. I have done tons of different angles, etc., and great for flow, but I've always wondered if one holds more compression PSI than another, or at least one would last longer, street car versus track car. Thanks. Really, if the valve job's done correctly, they should hold the same. So in other words, the hole is still round. So whether you put a 45-degree seat or 50-degree valve seat, they should theoretically hold the same. The reason why one, say a 50 versus a 45, the 45 will last longer is because of the way it's hitting. So if you look at a 50, it's more of a slant like this, and it's trying to pull the valve in. In saying that though, that's kind of theoretical. In theory, I have had 50-degree valve jobs that have done 3 straight seasons of drag week while driving around. So that's like, I don't know, 5,000 or 10,000 miles, and these are some brutal miles. I mean, I shouldn't say more than that. Probably 5,000 miles actually in a year. So there was 15,000 total miles. When the head finally came in, it was still sealed. So, but on other cases, you can have things where the valve train control isn't very well, and it can wear out any valve job, 45 or 50. So there you go. Let's go to my next one. Of course. All right. This is from Pretty Vacant. It said, I had my alloy heads ported, and they cut the rocker stud threads on the inlay port, every one of them. Is this fixable by using block stud sealer, Dart Pro 1, small block Ford, 190 cc's, if it matters? All right, it doesn't matter. I know, probably can't see on the camera, but there's a set of Pro Max 215s. And actually, I'll just pull this up. Here you go. This is the Ford head anyway. Ta-da! All right. He's asking, does it hurt if you were to port and you broke through right where these rocker studs are? Not at all. Hasn't even been ported. This is from the factory. This is the intake port one right here. It's broke right through. It doesn't hurt. So if you're worried about that, you're not. What you should do, and I tell customers this too, the way I have built the engines, and whenever you guys do too, usually I'll put NICs, excuse me, on the exhaust one, on sealer, on the rocker stud, on the exhaust. On the intake, I put thread sealer. And the only reason why is because I don't want oil seeping into it. It's just safe than sorry. That's all you have to do. You can use thread sealer on all of them, but I just don't. Because honestly, thread sealer itself, on teardowns, they harden, and it's more of a pain in the rear to clean. So I'd rather clean 8 holes instead of 16. All right, this is from Hot Rod. As a Hemi head, the port has a different valve angle of flow. Do you pay attention to different areas than a wedge head? I have zero experience porting a Hemi head. I actually have in this port, in this box actually, the flow plate to flow the newer Hemi heads, because people said, oh, I'll send them in for porting. Never did. So I don't have an answer to that. I don't know how it's going to be. As far as the way I was going to plan the port, it was similar to a wedge. I wasn't going to change anything, with the exception of worrying about how much air would actually leave the exhaust. So on the exhaust side, I probably wouldn't make things move that much more, because it's going to pull out your intake charge. So I'd make it flow just enough on the exhaust, but on the intake, just do more stuff. Next question. This has two questions. This is from Logan Gibson. What do you think is the best way to simply be able to guess or calculate how much horsepower a cylinder head will be capable of? There isn't. There's a lot of calculators that are out there that say, 2 horsepower per CFM, or this amount of cross section should make this amount of power. You really can't. The problem with those is there's too many other variables in the engine, and I'll explain. Let's say you had a head that flows 300 CFM. Say, for instance, the AFR 195 for a small competition port for a small block Chevy. It flows about 300 CFM. If I put that on a 350 with a hydraulic flat tappet camshaft and 9.5 to 1 compression, it's probably going to make 450. If you do that 2 horsepower per CFM, it ain't doing it. Not even close. Meanwhile, if you put it on, say, a 400 and we gave it, I don't know, 13 to 1 compression ratio, solid roller camshaft, obviously it's probably going to make more than 600. So there's a lot of variables. So you can't just say, hey, when I'm looking at flow or anything like that, you really can't say that. Even with cross sections, so you can put, cross section should match your engine RPM and engine size. However, if you were to put them on the right, it's sized perfectly for what it's doing, and then you put the wrong camshaft that's not sized for it, or a smaller carburetor, or a non-ported intake, everything kind of goes out the window. So there's people claim to have calculators, but they're so general and basic, you really can't apply them. This is question 2 from Logan Gibson. What do you believe is the best small block Chevy heads for low lift cams, like under 500? Out of the box, AFR. And their AFR 195 stuff, the competition ported one really has the best, for the size of valve, has probably the best low lift flow. Now, is it the best? No. Because if you look at, again, if you're, I need to back this up. If you were trying to just look at flow for like a lift range, you're doing it wrong. And I'm going to explain why. My Brodix Dragon Slayer 248 with the wing, which is a huge port, actually the 255 one, the bigger one, it actually has the best low lift flow of any of the small block 23 degree ones, standard port, that I've done. So if you look at that from, I mean, it's moving like 200, almost 260 CFM at 400 lift. Vortec heads, the smaller stuff don't do that. The AFR 195, which is a really great head, don't do that. The problem is, if you were just focusing on that, you would shove that head on whatever you're trying to do, and it's probably the wrong size head for that application. Don't look at it that way. You need to focus on the size and the flow, because those together make velocity anyway, like I've explained before. And that's what you need to target, instead of looking for which one flows better below 500 lift. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. This is from Brian Dougal, one of my customers. This will be your favorite, Eric. An LS question. What is the ideal cross section for a Street 6.0? I'm thinking best torque curve 2500 to 6500, like you do for Engine Masters. Our LS3, L92, 821s, 823 too big. Older stock cam videos show lots of more power with rectangular ports, but the torque curve may be suffering. On the other hand, aftermarket cathedral port heads make all power with slightly better torque curve when there's a cam upgrade involved. What do I think? There's a couple things with that. if you were asking ideal cross-sectional area really for a street, whose street? Because there's so many customers might say, oh, it's strictly for street. What are you doing with it? Well, I'm gonna go race it, and I drive it on the street every like 5 miles. So that you can't do that versus as someone that I never go race, and that's street. There's two totally different things. But since you brought up the Engine Masters, if we were doing it for Engine Masters, it would be totally small, like very small, because in Engine Masters, we targeted between 2,500 and 6,500 RPM. But the truth be known, we could care less about 6,500 RPM. It's really the lower lift stuff, lower RPM stuff. So when we roll in at 2,500 RPM, you wanted as much torque as you could there because it helped your score. So it was much, much better to have a stronger torque curve at the beginning than it would be at the end. So because of that, we would size ports very small compared to what most people would do. So it would come on, as soon as it rolled in at 2,500 RPM, it might have like 477 foot-pounds of torque and then start climbing up to 530 and carry it, but it might only make maybe 600, 590 horsepower, which you look at a peak, you're like, that's a turd. But if you looked at the overall, that curve from the entire beginning, it was strong. So to answer your question, I can't. It really depends on how many actual RPMs you're doing. In general, I will say, and this is in general, the LS3 stuff, to me, the cross-section is way too big from the factory. And I'm sure they did that for a specific reason, but that cross-section is huge. They just simply are. So then you look at Cathedral and you got a more of a moderate one, you probably feel stronger driving around with a Cathedral port that flowed or moved the same amount of air as the rectangular port. You're like, oh, it's about flow. No, again, size, flow. So what I mean by that is, if you had a Cathedral port that flowed what the LS3 head does, which stock I think is like 310, 315. If you have an LS Cathedral port head that does that, which is not that hard, that velocity through the pinch is much faster than the stock LS3. You run that head, that Cathedral port, you will feel faster, especially driving around. It will feel much quicker because it's got much more torque. And on the track, it will probably beat the rectangular port. However, that's assuming you're turning less RPMs. If you were to turn, say you're focusing, like you're strictly a race deal, and you focus between 5,000 and 6,500 RPM, the LS3, the rectangular port, one's probably gonna beat it because you're only in the range where it likes best. This is from another day. I need to port a set of older small block Chevy World aluminum heads, untouched, but with 3,000 street miles over 20 years. They're kind of mystery as to what they really are. I called the manufacturer, they can't line up the stamping cast numbers other than saying they're probably 220 cast irons with 202, 1600 just cast in aluminum. Which on the books doesn't really exist. Can you do a short video giving critical measurements that I need to hit? Like guide to bowl and how to connect from the bowl to the head bolt hole to the opening and shared wall. The short turns are already laid back pretty good. And then it stops because I don't want to have time to read on that. But to answer your question, I'm going to do it this way, 2 parts. If I just gave you the measurements right now and said, hey, you need to make your bowl 98%, your throat 90%, at the head bolt hole, I'd make it 2 point, whatever your valve is, make it the same one there. So let's say 202 wide there at the head bolt, and your pinch should be 2.5. All those numbers together would sound like it would be great, except it depends on your head. I haven't seen that head, so I really can't answer that, because usually on a small block Chevy head and other heads in general too, you're gonna make the bowl only as big as it needs to be. So if the short side is really, really short, since I don't see the head, I would probably make the bowl bigger because it has to slow the air down to make the turn. Now, if you got a much larger short side, I don't need to necessarily make the bowl as big so they can go over that. So you need the bowl just big enough to go across the short side so the air doesn't separate. The throat, however, that's partly to do with your valve job. So if you've got a pretty basic and standard 45-degree valve job, 90% is about it. That's the only way you can get the curve for your Venturi to be right. If you try doing 91, you end up eliminating that. It's more of a straight run. You end up really hurting things. However, if you did a different valve job where the angles are in better to begin with, then 91% or 91.5% can be had, but that's hard to say. The pinch, again, that's a tough one to say too, because math would tell you what you need. So there's calculators. I told you I use a Stan Weiss one. That one's really simple to use. That's what I use. It asks for the engine bore, stroke, RPM, and then what you want for feet per second, and then it'll tell you your minimum cross section that you need. It's really simple to use. It's a simple calculator. However, just because you got that number that it needs doesn't mean that that head can get it. In other words, you'll probably break through on the push rod pinch side, or you can't go up and down enough. So I can't answer your question, what I'm trying to say. This is from James Barnes. Eric, I'd love to see a review of a TrickFlow 240 big block Mopar head. Any chance reaching out to TrickFlow and seeing if they would lend you a head to review? I know. I have not. So I'll answer the question, no, I have not. And I know you're watching this channel, you're like, man, you got 20,000 subscribers. I would say probably half the people that watch this channel probably are like, I hate this guy. Why does he get more views than me? That son of a bitch. And then you got the other half is like, this is amazing. But I know when you look at the 20,000 or whatever, you're like, I bet you manufacturers just lining up to have you do stuff and help you out in any way. No. Luckily, AFR was probably one of the first ones and definitely been the most generous about, hey, I've got a set of heads, why don't you flow those and tell the world what you think. They've been really supportive in that way. And that just happened by chance. Other manufacturers are not knocking down my doors to have me flow their heads. So if you like to see a TrickFlow head, there's a couple ways. One, you can order them from me because I'm a TrickFlow dealer. Or two, you can get in contact with them and maybe they'll send them. And I've thought about sending an email, but I bet you this is how it's going to go. Thank you for your response. We'll consider it and never hear another word. Okay? It's just the nature of the beast. Because you got to look at their standpoint too. I mean, they're like, you know how many YouTubers there are? You don't even have 200,000 viewers. Which is true, but I do have a pretty good audience, I would say. But the point being is, they are not knocking down on my door to do stuff. Matter of fact, all that ProMax stuff, you would figure, because I bet you I have probably doubled the sale. I probably haven't doubled. I've probably given ProMax probably at least 5 to 10% bump in their sales, and not on purpose. Every one of those heads, not a single one got sent to me for free. It's all because customers ordered. Yeah, so you would think, oh, they're going to send you stuff so you could. No, it doesn't. It just doesn't happen. Anyway. This is from Ray. Are you accepting new clients? I'm looking to have a set of Brodix ST SPF heads done. Yes, I am accepting new clients, except for, are you willing to accept the wait time? Most don't. I won't tell you the wait time because this video can be watched 3 months down the road and be like, oh, okay, it's going to throw off. It is a long wait time because there's a lot out here to get done. This one is pretty simple. It says, please test a Brodix turtle. I probably will in a mule, but not yet. This will be my last question because I'm already over time. And I'll probably do another video and answer the rest of these some other time. This is from PJ Taylor. Really enjoy your videos. Couple questions. One being is, there a considering factor between valve overlap and chamber design as far as D-shaped chamber and closed heart chamber? Would the closed chamber benefit from between more overlap? And cam question, when running a dual pattern with considerable more exhaust duration, how would this corresponding with header design, primary tube diameter, link, collector design, when considering 4-to-1, merge, or tri-Y? We'll start off with the first one. The overlap one on the different chamber designs, it's more, if it's a wedge, they're about the same. It's really when it starts getting rotated. So like, if you look like a big block, the valves, so like a wedge, you have two valves that are like this. When we do a big block, they start turning, and then they can turn even more. And then Hemi, of course, like this. That affects overlap more than having a heart-shaped versus a D-shaped chamber. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Also, which I haven't gotten into, and I'm not going to undo this one because I don't want to give up a little trade secret, but there's something else that makes more of a difference. And you're like, oh, mystery. Well, I got to keep something. I told you that was going to be the last one except for this. someone had asked, and I don't know where it is on here, and I told I'd mention it. What do you think about the 128 formula for camshafts? I'm gonna make it real quick, sort of. I'm probably gonna go make a short story long. I don't agree with it. You're like, oh, you're that guy. Because when I look at stuff, because I sell custom cams that go with my heads, and the only reason why I even started doing that is because, and I know people say this just as they get more sales, but it's halfway true. The only reason why I even started selling camshafts is because I kept doing heads, and they would get a camshaft that was absolutely horrible. So they're like, this doesn't belong on it. And like, no, this guy's an expert. I was like, he's expert at sucking. That's what he is. But anyway, so I started doing cams. Here's the thing that most cam people don't tell you, and they should. You're like, oh, this guy, another one of those. Because they always say that in the video too. That's how they sucker you with their thumbnail. Things you should know. You know? Here's what you should know. Even if I was to spec you a camshaft, I don't care who it is, and I spec you a camshaft, it's not the best camshaft. Because when we're doing engine masters testing, and even other teams were too, they pick the best camshaft, and then they would probably buy 3 other camshafts. So they look at how that power numbers were and wondered if I altered this event, in other words, maybe I made the intake valve open earlier, or open later, or shorter, change my lobe separation, any one of the events. And they're looking at the dyno chart and wondering how it would change. They would then order that camshaft, and then they would look at how that did. And then they were like, okay, now I've got 2 data points, and they would order the 3rd camshaft to see. And I mean to tell you, it was never the first camshaft, or I shouldn't say never. It was very rarely where your first camshaft ends up being the best choice. If it is, it's because you didn't make smarter guesses after that on what you should or shouldn't do. You weren't looking at the other data with your engine. So when all these people talk about this is the formula you need for your camshaft, they're full of crap. It's not, because someone else could come right in after you. If I get your cam specs and I look at all your data, I probably can pick you a better one. Now, is it going to make a huge gain? No. They might be really, really close, and this one's going to pick you up only 10 or so horsepower. But you can look at what they have and pick a better one. So the second guy you get a camshaft from always has the advantage, unless they're a moron. Anyway, those formulas are just formulas. I can tell you this. Every engine is so different. They want what they want, and it's not what you want. So the way I look at it, I've got a program that I started using, and I used that, but that was only in the very beginning. Now I've got so much customer data, and most of the heads I already have stuff that I've done with. So I've got data to start off with that it's pretty close to what someone else is going to use. And then I'm like, I need to alter just this to help them out. So maybe it needs more exhaust duration because it felt like it should carry the power longer. Or maybe when I ask them like the cranking compression, like it should be higher. So I need to do something to bust that up. So if you ask me this is going to be really weird. I focus on a duration number that I think it needs for the cylinder head that it is. So if a head's moving a good amount of air and it's got a lot more size, I might shrink the duration down. But I'm also, and this one's a little bit weird, I'm focusing on a certain cranking compression rate, because you can make it make more, but it's just going to make more torque and fall on its face. So you target, to me, it's target that, and then you find the duration you need. So that's part of the puzzle. There's not one thing. It's part of the puzzle. Find the duration you need. Try to get the cranking compression ratio. It should be within this range. And then other points too, like the exhaust and making sure it carries past its range. That seems very confusing. It's like, I don't make any sense because it doesn't. It's too complicated to use just one formula. The biggest thing you need is just more data. The more you do them, the better you get. But you have to look at all events. So anyway, hopefully that answers some of the questions. Sorry if I didn't get all your questions. Guys, it's been more than enough time. I'm sorry I didn't get to all your questions. You guys take care.